Conceptual prototypes. So I will first present a problematization of the issue at hand. I will later highlight some of the contents of the book that we are reading in the seminar, and I will end by giving some feedback to the work that the participants of this seminar have been doing. So what is the true meaning of a word? That's the first question that I would like to tackle. And in order to do this, I would like to talk about mental representations. So, most often when you're trying to think of the true meaning of a word, what you're trying to find is a representation that you think most others will also accept as the most common exemplar of the thing. And then you begin to describe the thing. But you're thinking about three different mental representations, probably at the same time. Your own mental representation of the thing, what you believe is also the most common mental representation of the thing for most other people, and what you believe most other people believe about most other people's mental representations of the thing. These mental representations may coincide to a larger or lesser extent. Examples: objects of conception that coincide across people's minds by a lot. Standard products. Please think about what an egg looks like for 2 seconds. 1, 2. Was it something like this? Or something like this? Are these other eggs less eggish than the former ones? And what about these ones? And these ones? Is there a universal intrinsic property of egghood? What about the way they are cooked? Which of these is a boiled egg for you? Which of these are fried eggs for you? What do you personally call scrambled eggs? So we have three mental representations. Your own mental representation of eggs, boiled eggs, and scrambled eggs. What you believe is also the most common mental representation of eggs, boiled eggs, and scrambled eggs for most other people. And what you believe are most other people's beliefs about most other people's mental representations of eggs, boiled eggs, and scrambled eggs. Another example: I have a mental representation of myself, I have a mental representation of what I think you think about me, and I have a mental representation of what I think you think that other people believe about me. Sugar. Think of sugar for 2 seconds. 1, 2. Did you think about a type of sugar like this one or like this one? How does sugar have to be in order to be sugar? Which of these has more sugarhood or is more sugarish than the others? What about these? Are they artificial sugar, unreal sugar, fake sugar? What are they? Now try to imagine what toilet paper looks for 2 seconds. 1, 2. Probably not very different from this, except maybe for the quality. What about toothpaste boxes? What comes to your mind when you think about toothpaste boxes in the aisle of the supermarket? Is it very different from what I'm showing you right now? Now, objects of conception that coincide across people's minds, fair enough, but more variation starts to emerge. Think of spoons for 2 seconds. Did you think about spoons like these ones? These ones? Or 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 something like this? Or was it something like this? Or like these ones? Did you happen to think about plastic spoons? Or something like this? Or like this? Or like this? Or this? Or this? Or did you think about anything similar to this? What about these ones? Now, which of the following are the least spoonish for you? Are these sufficiently spoonish for you? What about these ones? And these ones? What about the one on the right here? Are you willing to accept these as spoons? If you ever see one of these, will you say, oh, that's a spoon? Now, is this what you think about when you think of spoons? Probably not. So what is the universal feature of spoonishhood? What about all the following cutlery? Let's see other types of cutlery. How do we use these ones? How do you use these? How do you use these and these and these? And for 10 seconds you can pause this video and try to imagine yourselves using these different pieces of cutlery. What about this one? How would you ever be able to use this? What is the first thing you think about when you see this? Does the concept of spoon come to your head at all? If so, how so? Would you say that they are not cutlery? Why? If they're not, what are they? Now, observe all of the following. Imagine yourselves using these for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Imagine yourselves using these for 3 seconds. You can pause the video and start to think about this. What about this one? How would you use it? And this one? And this, and this, and this, and this chair, and this, and this. And what about this one? And these stairs, and this, 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 and these stairs, and this, and this, and this, and this. Does it make any sense? What about this one, and this, and this, and this? So, there are objects that don't quite fit very well in their respective categories. But could you say that all these objects are meaningless, or that there are no words to describe them? Objects of conception that differ across people's minds due to more specific details. Let's see some examples. Imagine you're going to buy a new smart TV. Think for 3 seconds. What is the first thing that comes to your mind in your decision making? 1, 2, 3. Most smart TVs nowadays look pretty much the same at first sight, but when you're trying to make up your mind of which smart TV you are going to buy, you are considering aspects that are not visible at first sight, right? Now imagine you're going to buy a new smartphone. Think for 3 seconds. What comes to your mind in your decision making? They also look pretty much the same, right? Now, objects of conception that differ across people's minds by a lot. Think about love. What is love for you? What is love for the people you know? Of course, this is shaped by your personal experiences. What about hate? What do you think of hate? What is hate? What is the nature of hate? What is the true meaning of hate? So, what is the true meaning of words? That's a question I would like to discuss with you all. The short answer is that there is none, but we do have expectations of shared knowledge. If you have already read Daniel Casasantos' paper on ad hoc meaning, you have a better idea of what I'm trying to say. We all have our own mental representation of the thing. What we believe is also the most common mental representation of the thing for most other people, and what we believe most other people believe about most other people's mental representations of the thing. Now, let's talk about discrete versus continuous categorization. Discrete entities. So if you look at the image on the right side, each and every object is a discrete entity. That means that you could never, unless you had a very serious problem, you could never wonder where the computer screen ends and where the desk starts, or where the keyboard finishes and the surface of the desk begins. These are all objects that are separate one from another. But what about continuous categories? What do we mean by continuous categories? They are very different from what I'm showing you right now. Let's see some examples. Let's talk about conceptual continuum. You can also say continuums. Both ways of pluralizing the name or the term continuum are equally well accepted in the literature. To explain conceptual continua, let's play with this a little bit first. So let me show you some boundaries of indeterminacy in some examples. Where do we stop seeing ships and start seeing arches? Try to figure that out. You can pause the video anytime and think about it for each picture that I'm going to show you. What about here? Where did you say there are no more boats on this picture? Here, you should notice there are two different categories of conception. And where do you draw the line between one and the other? Here, I hope you're able to notice two or three different categories of conceptualization, and then ask yourselves, where exactly do you draw the line between one and the others? Okay, I'm going to go through the rest of these images a little bit more quickly. You can pause the video anytime if you wish to observe in more detail each of these images. Just keep in mind that the point of these images is to think about the transition from one category to another. Where exactly do you draw the line? Okay, so those are continuous categories that merge into other continuous categories. In some cases, you have an entity that is discrete, that does have boundaries. In other cases, you have entities that don't have internal boundaries, but the point is that they are examples in which we are playing with the concept of continuums, and one category merges into another. Now here, where has yellow completely stopped and another color started? You can pause the video and try to answer that. What about here? Where do you exactly draw the line between one category of color and another category of another color? Is there a line where you can do this? Now, here, which of these squares reflects the true meaning of blue? Which is the true blue? There are many different squares that you would very probably call blue, but which is the one that you could say that it's the true blue, the one and only true blue? Now, which of these is a true tiger, and which is, could you say, a false tiger? Which of these is a true giraffe, and which is a false giraffe? You can see several giraffes here. Can you make up your mind? Here's a little close-up of two of them. Now think about temperature, hot and cold. Where exactly could you say that you have transitioned from hot to warm or some other term and then to cold? Is there an exact number of Celsius degrees at which we can universally say that it is already hot or it is already cold. Cold and warm. You can pause the video and read these pieces of advice. And one good wonder, assuming that it is true, I don't know if it's true, but assuming that it is true, how hot does water have to be in order to obtain the benefits that, according to this image, you should be able to get, and how cool or cold the water should be in order to achieve the benefits that you are presumably going to attain from taking a shower with cool or cold water. What is the exact temperature? In your washing machine, what does it mean for water to be cold, warm, or hot? The seasons of the year. When, at what day, at what hour, at what minute, second, and millisecond would you say that you have gone from one season to another? Is there a very specific day, time, hour, minute, second, and millisecond at which you can say, yes, we have gone from one season to another? Is there such a thing? What about the way you feel? What about pain? Is there really a way to measure pain in a way that everybody agrees that right there you can call the situation, your own emotional situation, as one with no pain and one with pain? It's difficult to tell exactly what that measure would be and what it would be like, and if it would be the same for everyone. What about age? When can you tell that somebody has gotten old? Is there a day in my life in which I can say, oh, today at 5 o'clock with 30 minutes and 35 seconds and 25 milliseconds I got old? You can notice that this is what we mean by conceptual continua. What about intelligence? Can we really mark a number at which people stop being intelligent or start being intelligent? Is that really possible? How many conceptual continua are into play when we are trying to praise the intelligence of a person? So basically what we have is discrete categories and continuous categories. What do continua or conceptual continua have to do with prototypes? Conceptual continua are at the core of conceptual prototypes theory. You won't understand conceptual prototypes if you don't keep continuous categorization in mind all the time. So, second part of this presentation, conceptual prototype theory as described in the book that we are reading in our seminar. This is the cover. This is the index of the first two chapters. So, our modern concept of prototypes in cognitive linguistics originated in experiments with Munsell color chips in the late 1960s and the 1970s. Let's talk about goodness or typicality of category members. If you had to pick one and only one of the following to represent each color, which one or ones would you choose? So these are what we call Munsell color chips, and if I asked you to please choose the one and only one that best represents yellow, which one would you choose? If I asked you to pick the one that represents the one and only one that represents green, which one would you choose? What about blue? What about red? Which of these many chips would you choose? Whatever your choice is, it doesn't mean that there is only one green or one yellow in the universe, but your choice reflects what your prototype for that color is. Remember, we have three mental representations of the thing. Rush, 1971, used informants from the Dani people who only had two color terms in their language, and she also used children aged from 2 to 3 years old in order to find the conceptual prototypes in these individuals that were not biased by culture. And this is what she found. She found that focal colors or prototypes are perceptually more salient than non-focal colors. The attention of 3-year-olds is more often attracted by focal colors or prototypes than by non-focal colors, and 4-year-olds match focal colors more accurately to a given display of other colors than non-focal colors. Also, focal colors or prototypical colors are more accurately remembered in short-term memory and more easily retained in long-term memory. And the names of focal colors are more rapidly reproduced or produced in color naming tasks and are acquired earlier by children. So I won't go into the many details of how these findings were attained, but basically what the experiment showed is that there are certain colors that are more easily identified, remembered, learned, that call your attention more, and those are the ones that were eventually called prototypes. Now, let's talk about birds. Imagine a bird for 2 seconds. 1, 2. So, whatever came to your mind, was it more similar to the one in the center? Was it more like a robin, or more like a canary, or more like a dove, or more like a sparrow? Or did you happen to think about a toucan, or an owl, or a parrot, or a pheasant? Did you think about an ostrich, or a penguin? Chances are, I guess, that you either thought about something like this or something like this, depending on where in the world you live and what types of birds you're more accustomed to looking at when you go out and happen to see any bird. Interestingly, I dare to assume that chances are you thought about any one of these birds standing on a branch of a tree as opposed to walking on the soil or the grass or in some kind of pond. Chances are you didn't think of a penguin walking on the ice when I asked you to please think for 2 seconds about a bird. Chances are you didn't think of an ostrich running at full speed. Chances are that you didn't think about a peacock showing in all of its glamour and splendor its feathers. Chances are that you didn't think of a flamingo like the ones that I'm showing you right now. Now let's talk about vehicles. Imagine a vehicle for 2 seconds. 1, 2. So here are many different vehicles. Which one comes closer to whatever came to your mind? Chances are that the one in the middle looks more like what you were thinking about than the ones that are in the outer regions of this illustration. So it would be very difficult, not impossible, but it would be very difficult that somebody were required to think of a vehicle and that person started thinking of an elevator or a yacht. It is far more probable that you were thinking about something that comes in similarity, that is more similar to the ones in the middle. This illustration is attempting to represent the fact that, metaphorically speaking, there are certain types of vehicles that are at the center of the category vehicle, and there are other exemplars of that category that are least likely to represent this category. Weapons. Let's talk about weapons now. Imagine a weapon for 2 seconds. 1, 2. So, in this case, we would be prone to believe that chances are that you were thinking about something like what I'm showing you in the middle, and that as you get away from the middle, as you progress into the outer spaces of these concentric circles, you start finding things of the world that you might call weapons, that at some point you might say are weapons, but the likelihood of this happening decreases dramatically. What is the likelihood of you saying that your sandals are weapons, or a screwdriver, or a shoe? Would you say that a shoe is a weapon? It could presumably be used as a weapon, but when you think about weapons, that's not exactly what comes to your mind, I guess. Furniture. What about furniture? Imagine one piece of furniture for 2 seconds. 1, 2. So what came to your mind? It's difficult to tell what exactly was in your mind, and it's difficult to tell if it's a sofa or couch or a chair that should be placed in the middle as a prototypical, most typical exemplar of this category. But chances are, it is more likely than not that you were thinking about something along the lines of what I'm showing you in the middle. And as you progress further out into the outer regions, you start finding things that are not so likely to come to your mind when you think about the category furniture. If I ask you to think about furniture, will you start thinking about vase or a fan or a telephone? Is that what comes to your mind first? Is any one of those that are at the margins, in the periphery, in the outer regions, a good exemplar, will it represent a good example of this category? Which one should represent the category furniture? Which ones? Now, prototypicality ratings. So, Rush worked with American college students. She and her team presented 50 to 60 potential members of different categories. And she asked the participants to rate on a 7-point scale of goodness what each potential member should receive as a scale, where 1 point is for very good and 7 points is for very poor examples. And here are the results. So, for Bert, most participants ranked Robin as the first, or one of the first most representative members of this category, together with Sparrow. Of course, this can vary in other populations, but in the group study that she worked with, these were the most highly ranked members of this category. And as you go down, you start finding examples that received fewer and fewer points in this experiment. So by the end you have penguin and bat. Do you think of bats when you think of birds? That's not very likely to happen. In the case of fruit, orange and apple ranked as the two most commonly accepted best exemplars, most typical members of this category, and pickle and squash were ranked as the least likely representatives of this category. In the category vehicle, automobile and station wagon were the ones best ranked, and surfboard and elevator were the least well ranked in this experiment. Then for furniture, chair and sofa were the most highly ranked members of this category, and fan and telephone were the least likely to be ranked as good exemplars of this category. And finally, for weapon, gun, and pistol are the most highly ranked exemplars, whereas screwdriver and shoes were the least likely to be ranked or presented as exemplars of this category. The experiment also worked with other categories such as fruit, vegetables, sport, tool, toy, and clothing. And you can imagine what the results looked like. Can you think of a good exemplar for vegetable, for sport, for tool, for toy, for clothing? What comes to your mind first in each case? Now, let's talk about fuzziness. At what point does the category chair stop? When would you say that a given object, a thing in the world, is no longer a chair, and, as in the example I'm showing you here, becomes another thing, such as a lump of wood on the right side? You can sit on that, but could you call it a chair? Could you say that it is at the margins of the category, that it is at the periphery of the category chair, as a non-good exemplar of the category chair? What could you say about this? We need to talk about fuzziness of categories in order to understand this better. So categories do not disintegrate into the void at the margins. They do not just disappear. The margins of one category overlap with other categories. That's what really happens. The margins of one category overlap with other categories. So let's talk about fuzzy boundaries. Oftentimes, where one category stops, another starts. So, Labov carried out several experiments with pictures similar to these ones. Though the experiment followed as it is explained here. First, informants were shown drawings of cups and other vessels similar to the ones that you can see above, and then the informants were asked to name them. So what is the name of number 1? What could you call number 2? What could you call number 3? What is for you number 4? What name would you give to number 5? What is the name that you could give to number 6? What could you say that number 7 is? What could you say that number 8 is? And what could you say that number 9 is? In some cases, you are more likely to say that it's a cup. In some other cases, you are more likely to say that it's a bowl. In other cases, a bowl. In other cases, you could be more likely to say that it's a mug. And especially number 9, you could start thinking about vases. So what he found was this. 100% means that all participants agreed, for example, that vessel number 1 is a cup. But then when you get to number 4, you start getting some, and 5 of course, you start getting some discrepancy. Some individuals in the experiment are more likely to say that vessel number 4 is a bowl, and some others are more likely to say that it is a cup, and the same goes for 5. But what's interesting is that once the concept of cup starts to disappear in the vessel number 4, more people start calling it a bowl. So that's what we call fuzzy boundaries. It's a region, a conceptual region at which two different categories start being present, so to say, at the same time. Those are what we call fuzzy boundaries, in this case between cups and bowls. Now, attributes. Rankings of attributes. good and bad birds. So let's take a look at this list. This list is based on dictionary definitions of robin and bird, and also attributes collected from informants. It assembles what dictionary makers and ordinary people find worth mentioning about robins. You remember those birds. Such a list will never be complete, yet it helps to discuss the classical Aristotelian view of necessary and sufficient conditions against the alternative of family resemblances that we will discuss in a minute. So for a robin, that is a type of bird, the 10 attributes that are listed here are: they lay eggs, they have a beak, they can fly, they are small and lightweight, they can chirp or sing, they have 2 wings and 2 legs, they have feathers, they are thin, they have thin and short legs, they have a short tail, and they have a red breast. So under the classical view, these would be the attributes that could be necessary and sufficient to call a thing a robin. Using these attributes, we can tell if different birds are more birdy than other birds, which birds are birdier than others. So of course robin has all of these attributes, so it is considered a very good exemplar of the category. Sparrow doesn't rank so high, but only because there is one attribute missing, but that's really a very small neglectable difference. The dove shows a little bit of discrepancy as to the small and lightweight attribute. The parrot starts showing fewer of these attributes, or at least they are more difficult to accept as attributes of parrots. And the ostrich is an extreme case. There are far fewer attributes that we can associate with ostriches. And this is helpful to analyze family resemblance. This is a very important term. Look at this image. Let's take a closer look here. What do they all have in common? What could the necessary and sufficient conditions or attributes in order to say that somebody belongs to this family be? Let's take a look at them in this other picture. Could you come to a conclusion in which you were able to say these and these, such and such, are the attributes that define the fact that somebody belongs to this family, the Smith brothers family, or not? Take a look at this other way of representing the Smith family. So, what are those attributes? Do we have a number of attributes that you could say that are necessary and sufficient in order to say that anyone is part of this family? So, in this example, dark hair, glasses, a mustache, and a big nose are typical, but these attributes do not define the family. It doesn't mean that everyone has to have, every single one of them has to have these traits. Not everyone has dark hair, not everyone has glasses, not everyone has a mustache, not everyone has a big nose. Those are very typical attributes, but they are not necessarily present in each and every one of the members of this family. This is what we call family resemblance. Think about games. Is there a family resemblance for games? Are there a number of attributes that are very common amongst games? Or, on the classical view, Are there a number of attributes that have to be present in every single type of game so that you can say that it is a game? If you use the classical view, you won't be able to find a number of attributes that are present in every single instantiation of a game. But if you use a family resemblance approach, you will be able to find a number of attributes that are common, though not present in all. They are common, but not present in all of these different games. Think about all these games that I'm showing you right now. What do they have all in common? Is there one or several attributes? Can you come up with 10 attributes that are present in every single instantiation? Or can you just come up with some attributes that are present in others but not in others? So, what I'm showing you right now is a good summary of what we mean by family resemblance. Wittgenstein's conclusion on this problem was that games are connected by a network of overlapping similarities, which he called family resemblances. On a somewhat more abstract level, the principle of family resemblances has been defined as a set of items displaying the following kind of distribution. So you have item 1, 2, 3, and 4. Think about either the Smith brothers or the many different games that exist, and they have different attributes that you can call up, and there is some overlap that you can detect. For instance, if you analyze two brothers or two games, they probably share attribute B, but they do not share attribute, they don't have attribute C or D. And then if you analyze the family members of the Smith brothers, numbers 2 and 3, or a second and third game, they may share, for instance, B and C and D, but probably not E, and so on and so forth. In the words of Rush and Mervis, each item has at least one and probably several elements in common with one or more other items, but no elements or few elements are common to all items. So this is the concept of family resemblances. Attributes are not necessarily shared by all members. Let's go back to the example of the robin. So the robin, as we previously mentioned, can be described in terms of a number of attributes such as laying eggs, having a beak, having 2 wings and 2 legs, having feathers, being able to fly, being small and lightweight, being able to chirp and sing, having legs that are thin and short, being kept in a cage, maybe. But is it reared for the use of its meat, eggs, and feathers? Does it have a long neck? Does it have decorative feathers as a peacock? Does it have exotic colors as a toucan, maybe? So what you're looking at here is that the robin, you can see above, shares the attributes A to D, A, B, C, and D, with the ostrich. Both the robin and the ostrich, both of them lay eggs, have a beak, have 2 wings and 2 legs, and they have feathers. But the robin doesn't have a long neck, it doesn't have decorative feathers, it doesn't have exotic colors. Yet, if you compare the ostrich and the flamingo share attributes K and L. They both have a long neck and decorative feathers. So attributes K and L are shared by the ostrich and the flamingo, but not by the robin. You can start to notice the usefulness of talking about family resemblances in terms of shared attributes, but attributes which are not necessarily present in each and every instantiation or exemplar of the category. What about the peacock? The peacock has decorative feathers, but the robin doesn't. And the peacock has exotic colors, but not the robin. But L and M are attributes that you could argue are present in the ostrich. Some important attributes are even missing in the central exemplar, as I was saying, but they are shared by quite a few other members, even if it's not present in the robin. So that's the whole point of this. This shakes the Aristotelian classical view of categorization, which, in other words, is the idea that there are attributes that are essential and others that are accidental. Necessary and sufficient conditions used to be the criterion applied in deciding whether a member or a potential member would belong or not to a given category. But from what we have discussed, this view is not so helpful when you're trying to apply it to the real world. Attribute-based typicality ratings. Rush and Mervis 1975 carried out an experiment with 400 American psychology students. They tested 20 items for 6 categories, for a total of 120 items. So 20 items of furniture, 20 items of vehicles, 20 items of fruit, 20 types of weapons, 20 types or exemplars of vegetables, and 20 items of clothing. They were given 1 minute and a half to write down all the attributes they could think of for each of these items, for each and every one of the 120 items. A score or a weight, whichever way you prefer to call it, of 20 was given to an item if an attribute was shared by all category members. That is to say, if a certain attribute was present in the 20 items of one category, then the weight of that attribute would be 20. Example, in the category vehicles, all 20 items or exemplars of vehicles were described by the participants as means of transport. So the attribute of means of transport has a very heavy weight, a very high score in this experiment for vehicles. In the other extreme, for the feature or attribute installed in buildings, there was only one item, that is to say the elevator, that received such an attribute. So this attribute of being installed in the building has a very low weight. It's not a very highly scored, or it doesn't have very heavy weight as an attribute within this category. When this attribute-based rank order was compared with the goodness of example ratings experiments, the two types of ratings showed a high degree of correlation. So there are different ways to get to the same conclusion. Good examples have many attributes in common with other members of the same category. Bad examples in the periphery or at the margins of the category have very few attributes in common with other members of the same category. Think, for example, of the sandals in the weapon example that I showed you earlier on. But bad examples share more attributes with other members of other categories. There is overlap at the margins of fuzzy boundaries. So categories do not just disappear into the void. They start interacting with other categories when you consider bad examples of one given category. Now, context effects. When you read the sentence, the hunter took his gun, left the lodge, and called his dog, what dog comes to your mind from these 4 dogs you're looking at? Next, in the sentence, right from the start of the race, the dogs began chasing the rabbit. Which of these four dogs comes to your mind? She took her dog to the salon to have its curls reset. Which of these dogs comes to your mind? The policemen lined up with the dogs to face the rioters. Which of these dogs comes to your mind? I did not show you a collection or a group of different dogs, and I didn't discuss what the prototypical or most typical type of dog should be in the category dogs. But you can imagine what the central member or most typical type of dog could be. And you can tell that not all of these dogs are going to be generally ranked as number one in such a category. But once you start using the word dog in a given more specific context, the prototype is different. You don't think about the same prototype. You think about different type of prototype for different contexts. In different contexts, you have different prototypes. Summing up the key concepts, some of the most important concepts in this discussion. Of course, the word prototype, good examples and bad examples, fuzzy boundaries, periphery or margins, attributes and attribute rankings, typicality and attribute-based typicality ratings, attribute weight, and family resemblance. These are all terms that we need to use in order to carry out the discussions that we will have later on in this seminar. We did not, or I did not, I am not tackling other very important concepts, but I do want to mention them very quickly. You have probably heard about Gestalt. We could analyze prototypes in terms of Gestalt properties or principles. So you have probably heard of the principles of proximity, similarity, closure, and continuation. These are very helpful in further analyzing the internal structure of prototypes. I won't go into such detail because that would extend this presentation way too long, more than I think is pertinent for the moment. I will also not tackle the difference between situation and context, but you can read all about the differences between these two terms in the book that I have sent you. I will also not discuss what cognitive models are, but I would like to mention that they are very important if we want to analyze prototypes in much further detail. If we wanted to inspect the internal architecture, the fine-grained details of prototypes. And finally, I will not in this presentation, tackle the issue of networks of cognitive models. That would be very helpful to further analyze the properties or characteristics or structure of prototypes, but as I was saying, that would take far much longer than I'd like this video to be. Now, a few final reflections about prototypes. Is there only one theory of prototypes? No, different authors have different ideas about prototypes. For example, what examples should we use to explain prototypes? I used, as you remember, the examples of birds, vehicles, weapons, games, etc. But are those the best examples to exemplify the theory of prototypes, or are there better examples that better exemplify what conceptual prototypes are? Which examples will you use to remember all the explanation that I have laid out in this video? Will you remember the birds as the best exemplars of the concept of prototypes theory, or will you remember dogs or vehicles or weapons? Which of these many different categories will come to your mind more readily? If there are several versions of prototype theory, what do they all have in common? What are the attributes that are shared as a sort of family resemblance by most approaches to prototype theory by different authors. Can we come up with a prototype theory of prototype theories of the different versions that are around? We will see that syntactic structures, on the other hand, also follow a prototypical organization and that they overlap at the edges. Of course, syntactic structures being described as prototypes, in terms of prototypes, could not be the easiest way to approach for the first time conceptual prototypes theory. You could say that these are at the margins of conceptual prototypes theory, but that's what we will do. We will tackle syntactic structures in terms of prototypical organization. You can remember in the website that I sent you that I mentioned something about this. In the middle of this, of what I'm showing you right now, I typed the following. Our first topic this week is conceptual prototype theory. I assume many of you already know quite a bit about this. What probably not many people know is that syntactic structures are also centered around one or more schematic prototypes. And that just as dogs, birds, cups, mugs, and chairs are diverse, so are syntactic structures' internal semantic architecture, in spite of the seeming homogeneity. In other words, not all instantiations of going to, over, the preposition over, and so-called present perfect are the same. They display strong internal variation which we need to be aware of. And of course, I will propose some of these instantiations of these syntactic categories as prototypes of their respective categories, grammatical categories. So, if you take a look at this chart, this is the type of chart that you will find in most commercial grammars that are useful at an entry level to discussions about the nature of grammatical structures, but which are not very helpful if we really want to understand the nature of each of these different conjugations. Here is part of the work that I've been carrying out. This is a presentation of grammatical structures that I have been working on and that I elaborated myself. I think this is much more realistic than this. I think this is not very realistic in terms of does it reflect the nature of prototypical organization of categories, of conceptual categories, of grammatical structures of the English language. I think this is a not perfect but better representation of how the conjugation of verbs is organized in the English language system. Of course, I will not discuss anything about this chart right now, but I will later on. But I just want you to get a sense of where we are heading to and why it is important that we discuss what conceptual prototypes are. Once you understand, I hope you do understand by now what conceptual prototypes are, it will be much easier to discuss the nature of these different grammatical structures. We will only discuss one, so-called present perfect, and going to. We're going to discuss two of them, sorry. We're going to discuss two of them, going to and so-called present perfect. Of course, the preposition over is not here, but we will also discuss the preposition over in terms of prototypical organization, what is the most typical meaning we associate to each of these three different structures, going to, present perfect, and the preposition over. Now, look at this. What do you think this is? Are you looking at a duck or are you looking at a rabbit? Is this a duck or a rabbit? It's difficult to tell, right? It looks like both are present in the meantime. That's going to happen here as well. You remember I explained that different categories can overlap at the margins so that bad exemplars of one category become potentially good exemplars of other categories. That's what's gonna happen here, and it's similar to what happens here. We're able to manipulate mentally some images, either conceptual or concrete images. We can perspectivize. There is a phenomenon we will later discuss that is perspectivization, and we're able to perspectivize how we look at reality. So all these different structures are able to perspectivize, but some perspectives are more prototypical and other perspectives are more marginal. This is another example of this famous Wittgensteinian duck rabbit ambiguity. And here's a cartoon about this. There can be no peace until they renounce their rabbit god and accept our duck god. So this is something we will discuss later on, that there is not really just one meaning for each of these different structures. There is more than one meaning. But not all meanings are equally prototypical, central, or good exemplars of the central prototypical meaning of these structures. Finally, examples from these seminars participants. So some of you participated in our discussion in Parlay, that website, and this example, I found this example interesting. In Spanish we have the word olla and we have the term cacerola, and I think they overlap to quite some extent, so it would be interesting to analyze the term olla and cacerola in terms of prototypical attributes and to see how much they overlap, or if this is a sort of family resemblance group. Here is the participation. You can just pause the video and read the comment that originated this discussion that I'm suggesting right now. Someone else proposed discussing, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, I think it's opossum. So yeah, could you classify or categorize this as a sort of rodent? That's what someone else here was asking. And here somebody was proposing we could analyze in terms of prototypes tacos. Yeah, what is a taco? What is a good taco? What is the most typical, the prototypical type of taco in Mexico? In what part of Mexico? Someone else was proposing to analyze the categories book, paper, magazine, notebook, post-its, fanzine. Someone else proposed to analyze pasta. Yeah, I guess you could think that there are different types of pasta, but here I'm showing you a type of pasta that I would say is not prototypical, but marginal, peripheral, not a very good exemplar, because when you think about pasta, you don't think about pasta being red or green or blue or purple. And that's it. I'll keep in touch. See you later. Thanks for watching all this presentation.